Recently, I went home to Michigan for the holidays. And during my first few days back, I had work meetings and things that I needed to be a part of and ended up working out of my sister's law firm. And while I was there, a memory from my childhood came flooding back. I'm in first grade, and me and my classmates are seated in a circle on the red carpet in the back of our classroom. Our teacher, whose name for the life of me I cannot remember, wants us to go around one by one and say what we wanted to be when we grew up. I start excitedly waiting for my turn. It finally gets to me, and I say what I've always known and believed that I would be. I'm going to be a judge. And my teacher, in a very questionable way, says, okay, you know you just don't get to be a judge. Do you know what you want to be first? A lawyer, I shouted back, because me and my sister, who is 2 years older than me, already had the whole thing planned out. We were going to follow in our grandfather's legacy and start our own firm. I would skip a few grades, so would be able to go to law school at the same time, and then eventually I would be appointed in a court of law. I gave up on my part of our dream sometime between the start of my substance use in high school and the rise of it in college. And so much has happened since then, from my recovery to my career working with young people in recovery to finding my voice, this podcast. And at the end of my flashback, I was reminded that oftentimes the best plans are the ones that you have never even dreamed. You're listening to the final episode of Beauty in the Grit. Reap what you need. I remember the first time I was asked to speak about my recovery. It was the winter of 2011. I was 90 days sober and living in Brooklyn, New York, and I was terrified. So for me, a huge reason why I drank and used drugs was because I never really felt comfortable in my own skin. I feel every emotion and experience so deeply. And because of this, my experience growing up and trying to figure out who I am, be vulnerable, make friends, was just plagued with these fears of what other people are going to think about me. Are they going to be mad? Will this make them happy? Am I going to win? And the biggest question I had was, will they like me? So when I got sober, one of the first things I started to unravel was how afraid I was to be myself in this world. And because I spent so much time hiding, the scariest part was that I didn't even know who I was. And if I wanted to figure that out, I realized that I was going to have to take some risks, because for the first time, I wanted to create a life that I would never feel like I had to escape from again. But even after I got sober, I still wasn't comfortable. Being vulnerable, speaking my truth, talking about my addiction and what happened to me just seemed so impossible. So here I am, sitting in the front of the room. My anxiety is rising. My body is fidgeting rapidly in my seat. And I'm watching people pile in and greeting each other. I sincerely thought I was going to pass out while waiting for that meeting to start. And then an old man named Tom, who without fail attended that meeting every week, he sat in the same chair, wore the same blue baseball cap, walked up to me and said, "So, you're leading the meeting today, huh? Are you nervous?" I said, "Yes, Tom, I don't think I can do this." And he said, "Well, that's good. Nerves are just God's way of shaking the truth out of you." In that moment, I didn't feel relief, but his words got me through. And since that day, I've spoken with nerves countless times at recovery meetings and my work. And even in grad school, I spoke about my recovery at the White House, which is still one of the top 5 greatest and most surreal experiences of my life. So fast forward to the spring of 2017. I'm living in Georgia, and I had a friend in recovery reach out and ask if I would share about my journey for a video campaign that he was doing for his job. He said the producer was just going to ask a few questions about my journey and it would be over super quick. When it was my turn to be interviewed, I was ready for every question but one, the last one. The producer said, "Okay, Ariel, that was great. Now I want you to look into that camera and think about the person sitting on their couch right now that is struggling. And maybe they're scrolling through Facebook or wherever, and they find your face, they see your face, and they click on your video. They're looking for hope. And maybe it's for themselves or someone they love. What do you want to say to them?" If anyone is out there listening to this right now and is looking for a different way or struggling and can't even figure it out, I would tell them the same thing that a woman told me. She told me to give myself a chance. And reaching out and asking for help is the greatest thing that you can do. Like, give yourself a chance. After I was done, a voice in my head, clear as day, said, "This is what you're supposed to do with your life." I felt the sensation of peace flood through my body, my feet grounded deeper into the floor, and it became so clear that I was meant to create something, anything to help more people find hope through their experiences. And immediately after, I felt fear because I had no clue how to do it. A little over a year later, I'm living in Denver, Colorado. And I'm with one of my friends, and she said, "Hey, did you hear about this podcast panel thing that's happening for women of color?" "No," I said, "but we should definitely go." Because at this point, the progress I made on my moment of clarity was that I knew I wanted it to be a podcast. I've never envisioned myself as much of a writer. I love YouTube, but a podcast just seemed like a great entry point for me into what I wanted to create. And the second thing I did was that I started talking to my friends and family about it. They were super excited, but they also helped to hold me accountable. They'd say, "Hey, when are you going to start that podcast? What do you need to get it going?" And I would say, whoa. I just need more time, guys. I don't know where to begin. You know, this whole putting yourself out there is super scary. I was afraid. Those old voices were getting louder again. What are people going to think of you? Are they even going to listen to it? Does this even matter? Do you have anything important to say? Will they like me? 6 months later, I was getting dinner with two of my friends and having the same old conversation about how I was too afraid to start my podcast. And one of my friends just looked at me and said, "Ariel, fear is not a good enough excuse. You have to just decide to do this." About a week later, I'm sitting at my job and I got an email. "Applications now open. Colorado's very first podcast incubator for women of color." It was going to be a month-long program, and at the end of it, the most promising producer would be given $5,000 towards their first season. First thought, what is this, a joke? Second thought, oh yeah, you gave them your email at that event you went to this summer. I just couldn't think about it. I just had to do it. And by the end of the week, my application was submitted. And a month later, I was one of the 8 women of color that was accepted. The program started the beginning of June, and for the next 4 weeks, I was totally and completely immersed into the world of podcasting. From learning different formats to writing scripts, understanding sound engineering, and what really is an RSS feed. I was so overwhelmed to the point that I literally felt pain in my brain from it trying to expand and keep up and retain all the new information that was being thrown at it. But I wasn't alone. 7 other phenomenal women were just as committed to the process with me. We laughed, we cried, we barely slept, but I found my voice and was able to solidify the vision of what my project would become. And at the end of the month, I submitted my portion of my pilot to be reviewed for a chance to win the $5,000 towards my first season. And at that moment of submission, I knew win or lose, despite the looming fears and the incessant doubts, I had done my very best.
All right, no This individual has grit in her name. from the get-go, not only did she finish her project right, 3 days before the deadline, but when we listened to it as a group, even though she was ready to leave, she went back and pulled an all-nighter and made it better because she will not tolerate just getting it done. It's gotta be good.
I officially launched my podcast that October. And since then, it has been downloaded and listened to thousands of times. And I've received so many messages from people that have been impacted by it, which I am so grateful for. Because when I got sober, I had so much shame and guilt about the time I wasted and the things I didn't accomplish. I never became a judge. But now I'm living a life that I could not imagine with new dreams that are constantly unfolding. So when I'm afraid, I pray for courage. Because the truth is, I thought that my addiction was going to kill me. So my capacity to feel anything, even fear, is a privilege. To be stretched by life's experiences and still find a way to use what I've learned to help others is simply an honor. And as long as I'm breathing, I will always seek to find and share the beauty in the grit. This episode of Beauty in the Grit was produced by me, Ariel Britt. Mixed and sound designed by Jason Patton. Paul Caroli was the story editor. This season is funded by Patreon. A special thank you to them and everyone at House of Pod. To the listeners, your support is very much appreciated. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Until next time, and as always, reap what you need.